In this video, we're going to be looking at costs of production. Okay, so what are costs of production? They are what firms must pay to use the 4 factors of production and produce outputs or products as a result. Okay, so you cannot produce a product without paying for costs of production. Okay, firms ideally want costs to be as low as possible. Okay, because profit is what firms are trying to achieve, profit maximization. Okay, and to make the most profit, you increase your revenue as much as possible and you decrease your costs as much as possible. So ideally, cost is to be minimized for firms to make as much profit as possible. Okay, so what are some of the typical costs that a firm must pay? So rent will be one, so rent on a building, for example, if you're hiring a space. Raw materials, so for example, a coffee shop won't be able to function without coffee beans. Wages, so you won't be able to function without paying your workers for their labor. Interest payments, so if you have a loan from the bank is going to charge you interest, which is the cost of the loan. Energy is a typical cost as well. So for example, if you own a restaurant, running gas or running electric and running lighting. Advertising is another cost as well. So something that a firm has to do in order to expose itself to the world and show the world what they're selling. Okay, so that is a cost too. Now, the other type of cost is opportunity cost as well. So opportunity cost in this case of the firm is the minimum profit that is required to stay in business by the entrepreneur. Okay, and this is referred to as the normal profit that the firm is looking to make in order to stay in business. Okay, if the entrepreneur did not make this level of minimum profit, then the entrepreneur may be better off not pursuing this business idea and instead going to work instead, okay, and finding a job somewhere else. Or putting their investment, just putting it in the bank and getting an interest out of it. So costs, we have the long run costs and short run costs. Okay, the main thing that distinguishes long run and short run is that in the long run there are only variable costs, so all costs are variable. In the short run, a business will have both fixed and variable costs. Okay, so you might be wondering, what is a fixed cost and what is a variable cost? Now, a fixed cost, these do not change if you produce more or less output. Okay, you can produce 1 million units or you might produce 1 unit. It doesn't matter. It's going to be the exact same cost every single month if you pay for it monthly or yearly or whatever. So an example of a fixed cost is rent. Okay, you have to pay a certain amount of rent. Doesn't matter how many units you sell, you're still paying the same amount of rent every single month and you still have to cover that rent. Another example of a fixed cost would be salaries that you need to pay for the essential workers of the business. So if you were not paying these essential workers to work for you, then the business would not be able to function. So a fixed cost might be a manager of the business. Without the manager, the business is going to close down. Okay, so that is these are the examples of fixed costs. Now variable costs, okay, these are costs that increase when output goes up. Okay, so the more you produce, the more you pay. So for example, raw materials, if a coffee shop sells more cups of coffee, it's going to have to pay more in terms of coffee beans. Okay, it's going to have to pay more and more and more the more it sells. Energy as well. The more cups of coffee it sells, the more it's going to have to pay on energy to heat up the water that's needed for that process. And wages as well. So wages for the non-essential workers. Okay, so the more the coffee shop gets busy, the more workers they're going to have to hire to fulfill the demand in the shop. Okay, so fixed costs and variable costs. Make sure you know the difference and make sure that you're aware that in the long run, Only variable costs exist. All costs are variable in the long run. Fixed costs, these are only a thing in the short run. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Any questions, just leave them in the comment section